The tent poles are hollow plastic. They flex more than they should, and that matters before dark. Most people treat gear weight as a comfort problem. In a real wilderness situation, it becomes a survival problem. Kids' camping gear is designed for backyards, supervised campgrounds, and car trunks, not sustained exposure. The sleeping bag rated to 50 degrees Fahrenheit. The rain poncho the size of a sandwich bag. The flashlight with 2 weak AA batteries. This is what you have. And the temperature dropped 8 degrees in the last hour. Understanding why this gear fails isn't about mocking it, it's about knowing exactly what you're working with before conditions decide for you. Start with insulation. A child's sleeping bag uses less fill, thinner baffles, and smaller dimensions than adult gear. It traps less warm air. That's the whole mechanism of warmth. Trapped, still air held close to the body. When ambient temperature drops below what the bag was tested for, heat loss from the body accelerates faster than the bag can compensate. You're losing more than you're keeping. That equation shifts slowly at first, then quickly. The small tent offers a similar problem. Less interior volume means less air to warm with body heat, but thin low-denier fabric transfers cold from the outside more readily. Condensation forms on the inner walls faster. If you're touching the tent wall, you're conducting heat directly into the environment. That contact matters. The rain gear is usually a single-layer polyethylene sheet. It blocks water but traps no heat and breathes nothing. In a cold rain, you stay dry on the surface and cold all the way through. That combination is actually more dangerous than being simply wet. Wet, cold, and wind exposed is the configuration that leads to hypothermia fastest. Thin rain gear accelerates 2 of those 3. The flashlight has a projected runtime of 4 hours on full brightness. In practice, cold reduces battery output significantly. Alkaline batteries can lose 30 to 40% of their effective capacity in temperatures below 40 degrees Fahrenheit. The light dims before it dies. You'll feel the dimming before you register it consciously. By then, you're navigating in low light with no backup. The food, if there is food, is likely trail mix, juice pouches, candy, or crackers. High sugar, low sustained energy. Simple sugars burn fast. They spike energy briefly, then drop it. Shivering burns calories quickly and steadily. The caloric math gets unfavorable after about 6 hours. Hunger compounds decision fatigue, which compounds poor choices. The footwear is often canvas sneakers or rubber boots sized for a child. Neither is insulated. Neither handles prolonged wet terrain. Cold feet affect mobility faster than most people expect. When foot temperature drops, movement becomes reluctant and then limited. The cooking equipment, if any, is a small mess kit with a clip-on stove, or a toy version with no actual function at all. If there's no heat source capable of boiling water, purification becomes a problem. Dehydration compounds everything else. This is the inventory. Now the question becomes, what can actually be done with it? The first instinct is often to simply try harder, move faster, stay positive, wait it out. That doesn't change the gear. What changes outcomes is understanding the hierarchy of what this gear can and cannot do and using it accordingly. Shelter prioritization comes first. The tent, small as it is still a wind and rain barrier if positioned correctly. A tent pitched in a hollow or against a windbreak loses far less heat than one exposed on open ground. Ground insulation matters more than most people realize. Cold ground conducts heat out of the body far faster than cold air does. If the sleeping bag sits directly on bare tent floor, body heat drains downward all night. Anything layered underneath changes that. Leaves, clothing, a folded rain poncho beneath, not on top of. The sleeping bag creates a meaningful thermal buffer. The small tent's condensation problem can be partially managed by keeping the door cracked slightly for ventilation. Counterintuitive in cold weather, but trapped humid air saturates the sleeping bag's fill material and reduces its insulation rapidly. Damp insulation loses warmth. A slightly cooler, drier interior preserves more effective heat than a sealed, humid one. The rain poncho becomes multi-use. It's a wind barrier, a ground cloth, a reflective barrier near a small fire, or a water collection sheet. The flashlight battery life can be extended by switching to intermittent use, navigating in short bursts rather than continuous operation. In cold conditions, warming batteries briefly in a shirt pocket before use can temporarily restore some output. Small margins matter. The food should be rationed toward consistent small intake rather than one large consumption, which maintains more stable blood glucose and reduces energy crashes. Movement itself generates heat. Moderate, deliberate activity, not panicked exertion, can help maintain core temperature when passive warmth is insufficient. But exertion also increases sweat, which wets the clothing, which reduces insulation. That trade-off requires reading the conditions. This is where gear limitations intersect with judgment. The gear removes margin. Judgment has to compensate for what the gear cannot provide. The hardest psychological moment with inadequate gear isn't the cold itself. It's the gap between expectation and reality. You brought gear, the gear exists. The instinct is to trust it more than conditions warrant. That trust gap between what the equipment looks like and what it actually delivers is where situations deteriorate quietly. A child's sleeping bag looks like a sleeping bag. It functions like one within a narrow temperature band. Outside that band, it becomes an expensive layer of false confidence rather than genuine protection. Recognizing that gap early, before you're already cold and tired, is what creates options rather than removes them. The body's early cold response is peripheral vasoconstriction. Blood pulls toward the core, away from the hands, feet, and face. Fingers stiffen before you feel truly cold. That's the first physical signal that the body has begun actively defending its core temperature. At that stage, you still have options. Movement, layering, shelter adjustment, food intake, all of these still function. The mistake is interpreting cold hands as a minor discomfort rather than as information about what the body is already doing. Once shivering begins in earnest, the body is burning energy to generate heat it cannot retain through the available insulation. With kids' gear, that threshold arrives earlier than expected. The buffer is thin. The warning window is shorter. Shivering while inside a small sleeping bag in a small tent with condensation forming on the walls is a specific kind of pressure. The temptation is to curl tighter, wait it out, assume morning will fix it. Sometimes it does. Sometimes the situation has already progressed. Core temperature doesn't have to drop dramatically to impair thinking. A drop of even 2 degrees Fahrenheit begins affecting judgment. Decisions feel clear when they aren't. Priorities feel obvious when they've actually shifted. This is the dangerous phase with minimal gear, because now you're making decisions about inadequate equipment with a brain that is itself beginning to underperform. The gear problem becomes a cognitive problem. The cognitive problem makes the gear problem harder to solve. That loop is what makes this serious. What actually matters most across all of it is time, specifically how early you recognize the situation is developing. Gear limitations are manageable when addressed early. They become compounding problems when addressed after the body is already stressed. The small tent still provides cover. The thin sleeping bag still provides some warmth. The rain poncho still blocks wind. None of them perform well. All of them perform better when used immediately and intelligently rather than when conditions have already deteriorated. Water is a consistent issue. Kids' gear rarely includes a reliable filtration or purification tool. Dehydration in cold environments is common and frequently missed. Cold air is dry. The body loses moisture through respiration faster than it feels. Thirst is a lagging signal in cold weather. By the time you feel thirsty, the deficit is already meaningful. If water sources are available and boiling is possible even briefly, that removes the most immediate biological risk in many wilderness environments. If it isn't possible, the calculus shifts, short-term dehydration versus the risk of waterborne illness, and neither answer is clean. Navigation is another quiet pressure. A small flashlight with degrading batteries and no map or compass changes the cost of any movement after dark. Staying in place is usually the right call when navigation tools are unreliable. Moving in the wrong direction is worse than waiting. That decision, stay or move, is one of the most consequential in wilderness situations, and poor gear reduces the information available to make it. Fire, if safely achievable, changes the situation substantially. Heat for warmth, water purification, signaling, and psychological stabilization. Kids' gear rarely includes a reliable fire starting tool. A lighter, if present, is the most useful single item in the kit. If fire is possible and conditions allow it safely, cleared ground, no wind hazard, sustainable fuel, it compensates for several gear deficiencies simultaneously. Signal is the other priority that gear rarely addresses. Bright colors, reflective materials, noise making, anything that increases visibility to searchers. The small tent itself, placed in a clearing rather than concealed in trees, can be a visual signal. Visibility works both ways. What kids' gear teaches, in an unintended way, is exactly how much margin real wilderness equipment actually provides. That margin isn't luxury. It's the difference between a bad night and a developing emergency. Real wilderness survival situations involving inadequate gear require professional assessment as conditions allow. Search and rescue, emergency services, or trained guides familiar with local terrain. The principles here are awareness-based. Knowing what your equipment can and cannot do before you need it is not a small advantage. The person who understands why the sleeping bag is failing, why the flashlight is dimming, why they're colder than expected, that person still has options. The person who trusted the gear without understanding its limits often runs out of options before they understand why. Thin walls, short batteries, narrow temperature ratings, Those aren't just product specifications. In the right conditions, they're the timeline of a situation developing faster than expected. The gear didn't fail because it was cheap. It failed because it was designed for a different environment than the one it ended up in. That distinction matters, because the same is true of any equipment used outside its design parameters, child's or adults. Know what you have, know what it can do, know when it stops being enough. That knowledge is the actual margin.